decision is going to be seen by something like half the public as interference in the election.
The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border.
He promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime.
This was an unprecedented escalation by Iran. Israel has a right to respond to it, and we'll discuss that response with them.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We start tonight with breaking news right here in Washington. A federal judge has unsealed new evidence in former President Trump's 2020 election interference case. Tanya Chutkan, she's the federal judge, made public parts of the key filing from special counsel Jack Smith. He submitted this filing last week under seal. It has now been unsealed. As you might recall, Trump is facing 4 charges in this particular case, among them conspiracy to defraud the United States. The former president has pleaded not guilty. I want to bring in CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford to catch our audience up on this. Jan, this filing is a reflection of the special counsel's orientation in his case to the opinion rendered by the Supreme Court providing immunity for presidents in their official conduct. If you'd be so kind, pick it up from there.
Major, people throw around words like unprecedented and extraordinary a lot, breaking news. This is all of those things. Right. It is a 165-page, let's be precise, filing dropped today that provides new factual details about President Trump's alleged efforts to overturn the January 6th election in 2020, complete with grand jury testimony that we've never seen before. And then it chronicles his arguments, Jack Smith's arguments, for why Trump is not immune from prosecution in the wake of that Supreme Court decision. So this, when you kind of step back and start analyzing all of the things in this filing, it is extraordinary. It is unprecedented because on page after page, much of this we knew, and some of it from the House committee, but there is new information in here, including dramatic scenes where an aide bursts into the room where President Trump is sitting to tell him that they've taken Mike Pence to a secure location, and the president turns around, according to grand jury testimony, and says, "So what?" According to the filing. Dramatic stuff in there that people have not heard before. And then we have in this filing Jack Smith's arguments for why this prosecution should go forward, all 4 charges against the former president, despite that landmark ruling from back in July by the Supreme Court. And we talked about that at the time.
Absolutely.
There was a lot of overheated rhetoric around that, too. People saying that that the Supreme Court has shielded Trump from prosecution, that they had embraced Trump's claims that he had absolute immunity. And as you and I discussed at the time, that was not true. The court said that official acts could be immune, but presidents could be held liable or criminally prosecuted for their unofficial acts. And the court, in its opinion, referred to a case on the D.C. Circuit that kind of set out a roadmap for how Trump could be prosecuted. The actions of an office holder, or was he acting as an office seeker? And when you look through this filing that Jack Smith has dropped today, just over a month from the election, he tracks that reasoning in the Supreme Court's opinion, arguing that Donald Trump is acting as an office seeker, not as an office holder, and that therefore he is not immune from criminal prosecution for these, as Jack Smith says, unofficial acts.
That's a really important distinction, Jan. I'm glad you brought it up because as I read, and I've only had a few minutes, you've had a couple more minutes, but we're all still reading it as we go. What Jack Smith is saying is there is no role for a president in an election other than to preside over how the states handle it and then accept it. He was acting in a way that only a candidate, a self-interested candidate, would operate, not as the office holder of the presidency.
Right. He's an office seeker. And the vice president at times was also an office seeker, a running mate, or when he was...
And made different calculations and, importantly, different choices. And the vice president is present in this filing.
Absolutely, and that was a big question because the court did flag that the vice president and some of those communications, the Supreme Court did flag that some of those communications with the vice president may be considered official. But again, and Jack Smith did narrow some of that original indictment. But again, in these pieces of evidence that he puts forward to bolster these 4 charges against former President Trump, he is arguing that even Vice President Pence was acting either as a running mate, as a candidate, or as someone who is president of the Senate. And Trump had no role in that. So therefore, he argues, a lot of this evidence involving the former vice president should come in to bolster these 4 charges against President Trump. Now, what will happen now? Okay, we got an election just over a month away, right? And so now former President Trump is going to file his papers, which of course he's going to say this is not true, or this is official, this is immunity. Then all that paperwork, and then Smith can reply again, and then all that paperwork is due by the end of the month. October 29th, I think, is the deadline. And then Chutkan will sit down and make her decisions. So we're not going to have a decision for the election. It's going to take some time. If Trump wins, presumably this prosecution is over. If he loses, Chutkan will, go forward. Jack Smith will go forward. It will get appealed. I suspect that the D.C. Circuit is going to affirm Chutkan's decision, which I think will embrace this thinking. And then that's going to get right back up to the Supreme Court. And nothing would surprise me more than if the Supreme Court steps into this case. I think what Jack Smith has laid out here, the case against President Trump, his involvement with January 6th and his efforts alleged to overturn the 2020 election is a case that if he loses, will go forward, the D.C. Circuit will allow it, and the Supreme Court is not going to intervene.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Jan Crawford.
We'll see.
Thank you very much. I want to go down to Robert Costa and Nancy Cordes. Bob, you have done path-breaking reporting on parts of this story, all of them or most of them dealing with Vice President Pence. Your thoughts and reflections on what you have seen so far, and remind us of your reporting about what Vice President Pence did, knew, and suggested to President Trump in those fateful days.
Good to be with you, Major. Over the past 2 years, I've spoken with witnesses who are close to former President Donald Trump, the lawyers who were close to Trump in those final days of the Trump administration, and the Pence people, in particular, based on our reporting at CBS News, have become crucial witnesses for prosecution as they look to build this case for the Justice Department and Special Counsel Jack Smith. What they have found is what they believe to be an alleged criminal conspiracy to weaponize the vice president and the vice presidency against the United States to put forward fraudulent claims about the election and ultimately hold Trump in the White House. At first blush, it seems like a scheme that could never have happened in the United States. But Jack Smith is saying not only did it unfold in rapid force on January 6, 2021, but based on testimony and documents he's accrued throughout this investigation, he believes Trump was masterminding this conspiracy, what he calls crimes, to use Pence as a way to overturn the election by walking away from the electorate and calling for alternate electors to come forward in the states. And what Jack Smith does is he builds upon what the January 6th committee does. Previous reporting has revealed that so many lawyers around Trump were telling him, you can do this, but others were saying you can't. And that statement of lawyers saying you can't do this is very important as Jack Smith moves ahead, because it's not just like Trump was listening to legal counsel. What we have found is that Trump seized on this idea that he could stay in power by using Pence. John Eastman, the conservative lawyer, wrote a memo that Bob Woodward and I uncovered that detailed how Trump could do this in Eastman's view. Pence's lawyer said this is not legal. Pence said, I can't do it, it's unconstitutional. Trump was not persuaded. He went forward with his relentless effort to stay in power.
Nancy, I want to bring you into this conversation because, as we all remember, as the vice presidential debate reached its conclusion last night, there was a sizable moment of political drama. Governor Tim Walz asked J.D. Vance, who won the 2020 election? Did Trump lose? J.D. Vance said, I'm only focused on the future. Governor Walz said, that's a damning non-answer. This all is part of this larger national conversation, made more vivid in part by the new revelations in Jack Smith's filing unsealed today.
Right. And that moment from the debate last night is already appearing in Harris ads across the country today, Major. And it feeds into a larger argument that the Harris campaign has been making, which is that because of this immunity ruling, if Trump were to return to the Oval Office, he would be emboldened. He would be unfettered because he would be less concerned about criminal prosecution. And then taking it a step further, based on what you heard from J.D. Vance last night, still unwilling to concede that Trump lost the election 4 years later, they make the case that this time around, Trump wouldn't have a Mike Pence who was willing to step up and do the right thing in that fateful hour as he did. They argue that J.D. Vance is clearly still willing to perpetuate this lie, unwilling to go against Trump even when he knows that Trump is in the wrong. And so what we saw last night in the final moments of the debate, what we're seeing in this filing today, is something that the Harris campaign is going to be returning to again and again over the next 35 days as they make the case that Donald Trump is not fit to return to the Oval Office for another 4 years.
And Nancy, let me stick with you for just one more question. In the aftermath of the debate, and you brought up some of this last night in our special coverage, what's been the assessment of those closest to the Harris-Walz campaign and Democrats outside of that inner circle about how things went for Governor Walz?
Well, there's definitely a sense that there were opportunities that Walz could have seized on that he missed last night, whether because he was nervous or unpracticed or simply wanted to, resist the temptation to go negative. They feel that he left some opportunities on the table. On the other hand, they woke up this morning, Major, and they were pleasantly surprised to learn that in many polls, Walz actually appeared to do pretty well. When you ask voters what they think, it either came out as a draw or in some polls he actually was deemed the victor. And so that was encouraging to them. They've been arguing that yes, J.D. Vance may be a smoother debater, but they think that Walz told the truth, and that at the end of the day, what voters are going to remember from this debate is this exchange at the end about January 6th, something very easy for Americans to understand and hold on to: who won the election 4 years ago.
Our thanks to Nancy Cordes at the White House, Robert Costa on the road on the campaign trail. Thank you very much. Up next, we will get legal analysis from a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General as a federal judge unseals new evidence against former President Trump in the 2020 election interference case. That's next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. We are following breaking news this evening. Judge Tanya Chutkan has made public portions of a key filing in the Trump 2020 election interference case. I want to bring in Harry Litman. He served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General and now hosts the Talking Feds podcast. Harry, your big takeaways from this filing?
Well, my number one takeaway is that it was actually uncovered. Trump has tried very hard to keep all this information from seeing the light of day. Now it is out. The cat's out of the bag. He can't try to appeal or keep it from being there. So it has an immediate impact as sort of an October surprise in the election. In the substance, we have all kinds of new evidence, bombshells, really a fusillade of shock and awe from Smith, starting with Trump statements. He wasn't in front of the grand jury, but people were who heard him. They've given many of his statements. They're all going to be admissible at trial. They show he knew just what was going on. Second, Mike Pence statements. Remember, he wasn't there on January 6th, but he testified to the grand jury, and he lays out really a chilling campaign by Trump to make him try to break the law. And finally, on the Pence point, two more things, actually, Major. We know that when Trump, and it's the evidence is there on page 75, when Trump was saying to the crowd, Mike Pence has to do the right thing, he already knew Pence had decided against it, meaning he knew the crowd would be completely riled up when they found out that Pence wasn't going to do it. Finally, the issue on law. Does Pence evidence come in? The argument here by the special counsel on page 90 of the brief is it should come in because Pence is basically acting in this exchange as the head of the Senate rather than as Trump's sort of second in command. And that's the argument why it fits in the Supreme Court's rubric.
Harry, I want to pull on one of the threads from what you just told us, because the Trump campaign feeling a bit pressurized by this unsealing, says its timing is suspect. It's happening right after the vice presidential debate. It's happening in the teeth of the campaign. Therefore, it's election interference because it's creating all of this attention on something possibly injurious to the political fortunes of the former president. The timing of this is a reflection of both sides working on their briefings and the timing. And much of this has been pushed into this campaign, if I heard you correctly, by efforts from former President Trump's legal team.
That's exactly right. And Judge Chutkan, who made the decision to open it to the public, has been more than any judge in these last couple years impervious, wearing blinders about the election. She says, that's not my lookout. Just yesterday, Trump came in with a very strident brief saying, don't do it. It will affect my election prospects. It'll be election interference. But that's not what the immunity decision was about from the court, right? That was about whether a jury could hear things. So Chutkan made the decision that that doesn't change the ability of the people, which is presumed under the law, to see this brief. And people are combing through it now, Major, and there's just bombshell after bombshell identifying who is P5 and who's P3. But the bottom line is there's going to be many days where people are reminded, and this dovetails with what you said about the vice presidential campaign, where J.D. Vance just couldn't say Trump had lost because Trump refuses to say it. It's going to really chafe against those claims of his, and I think have an impact on the election.
Harry, you know this, I know this, but some in our audience may not. Testimony before a grand jury is not subject to any cross-examination. There's no defense attorney there. This is the prosecution building its case with as many witnesses as possible. Understanding that, how do you think Trump lawyers might try to argue against some of the revelations you've just described as bombshells?
Well, they can argue in court, of course, when this comes to trial, if it comes to trial, as it won't if Trump wins the election, and then they can cross-examine. There's a lot they can say. It just so happens that the process that the Supreme Court put in place was tell us everything, DOJ, so then the judge can figure out where's immunity and where isn't. And for that, the biggest point is just that it now has been revealed. You're absolutely right that when it comes up in trial, there'll be things they can try to do. But the mere fact of it, Major, we didn't have these statements before. And everything that a witness said in the grand jury that Trump said, that is going to be admissible at trial under the rules of evidence. So many of his own words are going to be used to try to convict him if this comes to trial.
Words he spoke, relayed to the special counsel by those closest to former President Trump, people he hired and trusted. We should remind ourselves of that throughout. Harry Litman, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you, Major.
With the Jewish high holidays underway in Israel, the country promises retaliation after Iran's missile attack. We'll get the latest from the region. That's next. Plus, the vice presidential debate, well, as you know, it's now in the books. How are voters reacting to what the candidates had to say? We will hear from voters. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Great to have you with us. Voters, as they are prone to do, are sharing their thoughts on the vice presidential debate just concluded. And our Jerika Duncan sat down with some of them in Grand Rapids, Michigan to gauge their thoughts. Let's listen.
Well, Major, a lot of people might question whether or not a vice presidential debate makes a real impact at this point in time. Well, I can tell you last night we saw the impact that it made firsthand. If the election was tomorrow, who are you most likely to vote for?
I'd have to say Trump. I really would. I mean, I like J.D. Vance. He was pretty good. Like I said, he was smooth talking. It was just, to me, it was better with Trump, you know, when I voted.
When you say better with...
You know, the economy was better. You know, there wasn't that much crime. There wasn't all these wars that were, you know, breaking out now. It just seemed different.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Out of the 6, we started out a little different. But now we have 4 people that are sitting here who are saying, you know what, I'm going to go with Trump. And you two are in the minority group.
It scares me.
That scares you?
It does. It
Why?
scares me a lot because I just don't like his rhetoric. I don't believe anything he says. Anything he says really just is, and everything, they've proven time and time again what he has said is lies, and he still, you know, that kind of scares me. It scares me that he's going to run our country again.
What was something that really sort of stuck out? And it sounds like the economy and immigration for everyone here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is still high up in terms of priority.
And abortion.
And abortion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, my three were economy, abortion rights, and then also gun control. I feel like on gun control, they both agreed that that something needed to be done, but there really wasn't a plan to fix anything. The only thing that I heard was Vance saying that he wanted more security in the schools.
And listening to the debate, who do you think will win?
I really don't know, but I think Harris is going to win.
You think Harris is going to win, even though you're going to support Trump?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised either way. I just, like all of you just said, you care about democracy. Like, Trump does not care about democracy. I think if you actually listen to him, you look at his actions around January 6th, you look at his actions leading up to the election, he will tell you time and time again, he cares about himself. He does not care about democracy.
Holly?
Oh, I don't know. I honestly don't. I'm right down the middle at this point, in who could go.
You could see it go either or.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just because I've heard the numbers are so close right now, too.
I hope Harris wins, but if she doesn't, our country's going to be in a lot of trouble. I really believe that.
Max?
I believe Trump's going to win.
Ellie?
I totally think it could be a flip of the coin. I think that there's going to be a lot of silent voters who are a lot of silent Trump supporter or previously Trump supporters that are going to vote Kamala and just don't want to say it.
And Major, something else worth noting, 4 out of the 6 voters I spoke to said they want to see one more debate between Harris and Trump.
With just over a month until Election Day, it doesn't appear that that's going to happen. Nevertheless, Sharika Duncan, thank you very much. Now to the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing retaliation for yesterday's missile attack launched by Iran on Israel. Most of those missiles did not get through Israeli defense systems, but some did. And our Chris Livesay is near Tel Aviv with the latest.
But some of those missiles did get through, like the one that smashed this car in a residential area here outside of Tel Aviv. Among the 180 missiles Iran fired at Israel overnight. The sky was incandescent with falling debris from many of these missiles that were intercepted by Israel's defenses, from the Western Wall in Jerusalem to here in Tel Aviv. Now, this comes amid a backdrop of a widening war in Israel at the border with Lebanon. Israel announced earlier this week that it was launching a limited ground offensive across the border with southern Lebanon to go after Hezbollah. They showed pictures of some of these cross-border incursions where they say they were destroying tunnels and destroying weaponry that they found inside some of those tunnels. This level of intensity of fighting is something we haven't seen since 2006, the last time Israel fought a full-blown ground war with Hezbollah. Chris Livesay, CBS News, outside Tel Aviv.
The vice presidential nominees were, by and large, civil as they sparred during the CBS News debate. So who do voters think did a better job? Our top pollster, that's Anthony Salvanto. You can see him right there. Will help to answer that question next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Viewers of last night's vice presidential debate have a lot of thoughts about how they each performed. And quite fortunately, they shared some of those thoughts with us. CBS News, right after the debate, found the audience was kind of split on who won. 17% thought they was a tie. But will this impact the race? We know it's extremely close. For some insight into that, I want to turn to our CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, your friend and mine, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, what do we know?
Major, you described this in the last segment as a civil debate. I am here to report the voters of America seem to agree with you. This is the big number that stood out right after the debate, as you mentioned. People said it was a generally positive tone. Almost 9 in 10 described it that way. And what ramifications does that have? Well, let me show you this. When we break it down, I asked people, how did these candidates sound? Majority said they each sounded reasonable as opposed to extreme, right? And that sort of echoes some of there's political back and forth about who is reasonable, who's extreme, but nope, both of them come out on the reasonable side. So that's part and parcel of all that. But the final thing here, Major, I want to show you this because you want to look at movement pre and post debate. Going into the debate, Walz was viewed favorably by 52%. His numbers went up to 60 favorable, and then Vance's number also went up 9 points on favorability among these debate viewers. So that kind of change, that kind of movement tells you that this debate had an impact and it was a positive one, Major.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you. I want to bring in our political panel. Joining me right here at the table, Shelby Talcott, politics reporter for Semaphore. Of course, all of you recognize Finn Gomez, our estimable CBS News political director. So I want to start with some sound from the debate that compares, I would say, not so favorably for the Harris-Walz campaign about the headline-grabbing situation in the Middle East. I want to play what Vice President Harris has said about Israel's ability to defend itself and what Governor Walz said in response to the very first question of the debate last night. Let's listen.
We will be unwavering. I will be unwavering in my commitment to Israel's ability to defend itself and to take seriously the need to deal with Iran in terms of the threat that it poses to U.S. interests, to our allies, and to stability in the region.
Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there.
Shelby, not a particularly strong moment for Governor Walz. He certainly got better as the debate progressed, but that contrast is pretty noteworthy.
Yeah, and I think, before the debate, we were hearing reports that Tim Walz was nervous, and there were questions about whether that was sort of expectation setting or whether he was legitimately nervous. When he came out and answered that first question, it did seem like he was legitimately nervous. And I think part of that is because he hasn't been out on the campaign trail taking questions as much as J.D. Vance has. J.D. Vance, as of a week or two ago, had done over 100 interviews and press availabilities since becoming the vice presidential nominee. Just having those reps, you could sort of tell that was the difference, and that his start sort of set the tone for the debate, I think.
It certainly set the tone for the early part of the debate. I think it would be fair to say he got his feet underneath him a little bit later. Actually, when he was sounding as if he was running for a third term as governor of Minnesota, talking about the Minnesota record, things that he was very deeply versed in. But to Shelby's point, Finn, this is a very interesting contrast and approach between the Trump and Vance campaign and the Harris-Walz campaign. Trump and Vance mix it up with the press much more regularly than Harris or Walz do. And that sort of insulated approach to politics can have a downside. And we saw a little bit of that last night.
No, absolutely. And I think that, conversely, when you look at Harris and Trump, how they prepared for their debate, their last debate, Harris did similar preparation to Walz, right? She kind of hunkered down in Pittsburgh. She did like the mock debates, and had someone stand in for Trump, all that stuff. He did the same. But I think there is something to engaging with voters, engaging with press, engaging with us, and just really that joust is invaluable. You need the reps, as people say. And I think when you
Shelby just said.
As Shelby literally just said next to me, Major, the esteemed Shelby. And I think you need those reps. And I think that if until you see that fastball in real life, you can't really take a practice swing.
I want to play some more sound that we might remember from the debate last night. It's when J.D. Vance addressed the issue of reproductive health, access, abortion rights, etc. And what he said was the work yet to be done by his party and, by extension, the leader of that party, former President Trump. Let's listen.
My party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word.
Fullest sense of the word. There's no definition in America on what that means. It's just sounded like a way to try to get by a place that is causing pretty significant and noticeable political pain for the Trump-Vance campaign.
Abortion has been a tough topic for Republicans over the past few years, and when you talk to people on Donald Trump's campaign, they are not pretending otherwise, even though Donald Trump has come out and sort of said, well, he's staked out his position, so it shouldn't be an issue anymore. They know that it's going to be an issue in this election and that it doesn't necessarily favor them. At the same time, what I also thought was interesting during that debate, during those remarks, as J.D. Vance was talking about abortion, was Donald Trump was coming out on Twitter or X and deciding to say that, oh, actually, everybody knows that he would veto an abortion bill if it came to his desk, which, of course, he had dodged during the last debate. So that was pretty newsy.
This is very newsy, and I think it's going to be important to see in the next 24 to 48, 72 hours, what is the reaction, Finn, within the self-described pro-life community to see their leader of the Republican Party say, if a federal abortion ban of some number of weeks, 15 or otherwise, came to his desk, he would veto it. That's not what they want to hear. And that was news last night, and it came directly out of this interaction over this topic in our debate.
Well, I remember just a few weeks ago when he's kind of stepped into the same sort of quagmire on this issue, and he got that backlash from social conservatives. He immediately sort of, reversed that sort of sentiment. He has to play, and he's on a delicate balance here, Major. I mean, he essentially has to, appeal and please his base, because he has to ensure that they come out in 34 days, and at the same time, he has to, appeal enough to those people on the bubble in places like Pennsylvania, where that issue did win for Fetterman in 2022. Like he has to be able to say to both those groups, "I am your guy." Like that is a very tricky balance, and it did not work last time.
And the fact that he tried to do that in the midst of this vice presidential debate tells, I think, all of us that it's uppermost on their mind, and they're trying to find some way to recharacterize and reframe this. Shelby Talcott, Finn Gomez, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it as always.
My theme today is 5 words: under budget and ahead of schedule.
A new book argues that Donald Trump's business success is a fabrication. The author of Lucky Loser joins us next. You're streaming America Decides.
My name's Donald Trump, and I'm the largest real estate developer in New York. I own buildings all over the place. About 13 years ago, I was seriously in trouble. I was billions of dollars in debt.
But I fought back, and I won. Big league. I used my brain. I used my negotiating skills.
Welcome back to America Decides. Donald Trump had more than a dozen seasons of the TV show The Apprentice to cast himself as kind of a mega successful businessman, a great deal maker, and a super large and super important real estate tycoon. A new book claims almost all of that characterization and self-flattery is a lie. New York Times investigative reporter and Pulitzer Prize winner Russ Buettner joins us now. Russ is the co-author of Lucky Loser, How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. Russ, it's great to see you. I want to get to the book in just a second, but with your permission, I want to take a premise of the book, which is Trump has a lot of exaggerated claims, builds things up, buries information that would suggest that there was something illegitimate or handed off to him by someone else to keep information from the public, and when pressed, lies about that. Do you see any parallels in the things you describe in the book about Trump finances and business to what we're seeing today in the special counsel's assertion and assertions about January 6th?
I think that's a great comparison, Major. One of the things that attracted my co-author Suzanne Craig and I to doing this book is we had done several long articles for the New York Times about his business performance, about his inheritance. And it seemed like when you looked at all of that over the course of his life and his family's life and a succession battle within the family, emerged from that when the Donald Trump that we saw in the White House became that person. And yes, you do see very early on that he's exaggerating. He's actually just lying about projects that he's going to do that never happen. He's picking fights with people. When people oppose him, he dismisses them with sort of middle school insults. And he's all along that period of time, throughout the course of his adult life, trying to create this impression that he's independently wealthy, that his father was a small timer and that didn't give him much help at all, and that he created a fortune on his own. And that's sort of the arc of this book, is unraveling all of that and seeing Donald Trump become who we all recognized before he entered the White House.
Russ, one of the great and celebrated American archetypes is the self-made person, someone who has nothing and creates something through grit, determination, innovation, and the like. That has been part and parcel of how Donald Trump has presented himself to the world. But as I've read through the book and the materials that accompanied it, it's more father-made than self-made.
That's a great point. Actually, his father was the person you described. Fred Trump was the child of immigrants. He started working when he was in high school. He didn't really have many hobbies or pursuits while he was in high school. He just worked. And he took advantage through the course of his life of some government programs that were meant to solve the real big problems of the 20th century, the Great Depression, housing for veterans during the war, or for soldiers during the war, housing for veterans after the war. And he built a fortune, a real estate portfolio that by the time he died in 1999 was worth more than $1 billion. And Donald Trump benefited from the connections Fred Trump had created during his time building in New York City. He benefited from financial support. He benefited from his father introducing him to lenders and co-signing on loans. He didn't really do any of that on his own. And then after it all sort of went to pot under the weight of his own decision in the early 1990s, his own decisions, he tried to get back, build another sort of empire, and that wasn't going very well until Mark Burnett, a legendary now television producer, showed up and made him the star of The Apprentice and brought a whole nother windfall that allowed him again to create some businesses that looked like he was sort of omnipotent, but really when we see the financials of them, we're really struggling and being supported by his entertainment money.
Is there something, Russ, to, if not admire, at least take stock of with former President Trump? Because in the book and his life, as can be documented there and elsewhere, he is a frequent risk taker and talks lots of people into accompanying him on risks that they might not otherwise accompany other people on. True?
I mean, it's definitely true. He was a risk taker. I think people will come to their own conclusions about whether that was a positive trait. I wonder sometimes if when you're risking in really banks' monies, that was what he was generally playing with, was bank money, junk bond investor money for a lot of years, and then not repaying many of those loans, he was really risking his own money or someone else's.
Ross Buettner, thank you so much for your time. The book again, Lucky Loser. The recent hacking of former President Donald Trump's campaign has pushed election cybersecurity right into the spotlight. Next, we hear exclusively from the National Cyber Director about the threat. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Fact, Russia and Iran are trying to influence this election and thereby destabilize American politics, and they have been behind previously successful hacks of presidential campaigns. Our Olivia Gaza spoke exclusively with the National Cyber Director about this and other topics. Another big concern, the number of open cybersecurity jobs across the country.
So where are the biggest gaps? Where are the biggest vulnerabilities right now? Are they in healthcare? Are they in infrastructure? Are they in finance? Help us understand where you're the most concerned.
Yeah, biggest gaps, concerns for me, the number of open jobs, nearly 500,000 open cyber jobs in this great nation. And it's not because we don't have the talent. We need to do better at reaching out and expanding the talent pool, the traditional talent pool.
And you're saying that now, to have a good job in cybersecurity, you don't necessarily need a computer science degree or any degree in a technologically based field. Do you need a 4-year degree?
Not at all. And you are right. We do not need a computer science degree to make a strong contribution in cybersecurity. The skills-based approach to hiring really is based on what an individual knows. What are the skills they have? How can they apply that to the mission? It's the right way to go.
You talked about your background, CIA, NSA, some of the top national security agencies that really deal with the most compelling challenges of our time. Their pitch, as I've heard it to potential recruits, has always been something of like a wink and a whisper. You know, if you join us, you'll get to be part of the mission. You'll get to do things that you may not have thought were legal, but it's really cool. So what is there a kind of pitch like that for these jobs as well?
For me, when it comes to cybersecurity jobs, I can say with 100% certainty that the type of mission, defending cyberspace, that one might do in the public sector, you can do it in the private sector as well. We've seen that our private sector partners are under the same type of threat and attack that our public sector partners are. So you're going to see that same type of cool fighting in cyberspace in the public sector that we'll see in the private sector. And frankly, some of our private sector partners see these threats before the public sector does. So it is an absolutely fascinating mission space. It's an absolutely critical mission space. And you can see it in the public sector or the private sector.
I'd like to broaden the conversation to some of the challenges that we've been talking about in the national security space. It probably hasn't escaped your attention that there is a consequential election coming up. Does having all of these jobs free right now suggest that we are more vulnerable than we should be come November 5th?
We are in a good space as a nation going forward. Back to Semper Paratus, always ready. So we're always going to try to up our game and be multiple steps ahead of our adversaries. But just to be specific, election security. That's a high priority for the administration and for the nation and for Americans across the country, election security. And we are leaning heavily on our partners at the Office of Director of National Intelligence, at CISA, FBI, and others to maintain election security and its importance to democracy. So we are secure on that front.
I mean, we've lived through previous successful penetrations of campaigns from a cyber perspective, hacking campaigns that targeted the Clinton campaign in 2016, reports that the Trump campaign has been targeted now in 2024. Do you think, just as the nation's longer-term cybersecurity strategist, that campaigns need to reframe their thinking about how they approach election season?
I'm confident that campaigns are focused on election security and protecting their systems and their data. That's one of the things about our national cybersecurity strategy. We want to maintain the security regardless of when it is, election season or not. The strategy and the policies that we have in place, again, always ready. It's 365 days a year, every year, regardless. It's not on a 2-year cycle. It's every moment of every day that we have to adhere to the national cybersecurity strategy and the policies that support a strong cyberspace for our country.
With our thanks to Olivia Gazis. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.